pleased to introduce Heather Rice, who comes from a family of chiropractors, has been offering gentle and powerful chiropractic care internationally for over 30 years. Having served over 10,000 patients studying the best practices and vital behaviors of some of the healthiest families in the world, she's focused her private practice on wellness care for infants, children, and adults. Combining this with nutrition, True Cellular Detox, a wonderful program, exercise, and best lifestyle practices, she provides drug-free solutions for a wide range of health issues, from maximizing immune system function to offering hope and support to families on their quest for optimal health. For any questions at the end of this presentation, please come up to the mic, and please welcome Heather Price.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I envision a world where the natural state is extraordinary health. And today, I want to cover three things in particular. So I want to work with helping you see in your own bodies how you can go upstream to be able to maximize the function of the immune system. And I also want to cover something that I've found has been one of the most challenging aspects of working with patients because it's a hidden aspect. And then thirdly, I want to cover what my patients have told me is the most challenging piece for them in following my recommendations. And I want to share with you the solutions that I have for those things as well. So when I was 13 years old, just to give you a reference point, I got strep throat. Anybody here ever had strep throat? Yeah? You remember what that was like, right? Couldn't swallow, painful, swollen tonsils. And that was exactly what my experience was. And I remember at 13 very clearly I could hardly even swallow a sip of water, never mind the pill that I remember clearly how big it was that the pediatrician had recommended. And lucky for me, my dad was on his way back from his first vacation from chiropractic school. And so I got my first chiropractic adjustment at 13 years old when I had strep throat. And wow, I will never forget it. Powerful. And when it happened, I was startled and amazed that within a few hours, I could swallow better, and I started to feel better. And so I asked my dad, how does this work? And he said, oh, I just help you turn the power back on in your body. And at 13 years old, that worked for me. Sounded good. I was so impacted by that experience that for the next 40 years, I began studying and continued to study what the healthiest people in the world do to get their health back and to keep their health. And so I want to share some of the most useful pieces of that with you that I've learned over that time. And we're going to look at the thing that is most disturbing to me now when I am researching and studying what the latest devastating news is for us. And so many of our speakers this weekend have covered this fact that in the last 50 years, we have started to see a dramatic crisis happening where we're at the point where 1 in 2 American children is diagnosed with a chronic illness. Now, my experience of strep throat, that was an acute illness. That was short-lived. My body knew what to do with that. And for 3,700 generations, our bodies have known what to do when we get acute illness, and we heal up, and we get a lifelong benefit from it. We've learned how to do that. When we start to see chronic illness, that means an illness that persists and doesn't go away, something's wrong. Something's getting in the way. So I want to look closely at it and start to uncover what's going on here and what do we need to do about this. It's interesting that when we look back in that 3,700 generations behind us, that there was this progression that occurred where we became the super species on the planet. we evolved to the point where we could pretty much go anywhere on the planet and adapt and thrive. We were the super species on the planet. And that ability to heal up from acute illnesses meant that we didn't go extinct. No, instead we thrived. So here we are, we've been the super species on the planet, and now we fast forward to today, and we are the sickest species on the planet. Right? So check it out, check it out. If you think of all the other species on the planet, do we see chronic illness in any other species? And if we do, what's the first thing we do when we recognize that some other species has a chronic illness developing? What do? We look at their habitat, don't we? And we figure out what went wrong there, and then we fix it, and then what happens? The chronic illness goes away. So clearly, we are not living a genetically congruent lifestyle. Our human habitat has gone sideways, and we are now reaping the repercussions of that. And yet, we haven't seemed to have learned from that experience. So we have gone from the super species on the planet to the sickest species. And so I want to, there's many different reasons why that has happened and what has changed and altered in our habitat, in our environment. But I want to just take a step, a higher overview to gain, again, a perspective, because I think it's where the solution is going to be found. So I want you to take a look at this illness-wellness continuum, right? So here's, oops, I pressed the wrong thing. How about that? Yeah. All right, so here's death, and here's health. And this is kind of the neutral point. I actually see 3 zones here. I see the sick zone, the not sick zone, and the healthy zone. And I would say that most people are actually living in the not sick zone, thinking that they're in the healthy zone, and actually never really tasting what real health is. And so instead what's happening is they're living right here saying, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy. Whoops, oh, I'm not healthy now, I'm sick. And then they have a period of time that could be short or long where they're sick, and then they pop out of it, oh, now I'm healthy. Right? Do you get that? And actually all they are is not sick. And so my job in working with the patients I work with is, let's just get you moving in this direction. No matter where you are starting from, let's just do anything we can to get you moving in that direction towards health. So we recognize then that when we have symptoms, they basically are telling us, when we hit this level of where symptoms start to show up, that we have been starting to move away from health. So there's a body signal, there's an intelligence in our body that is trying to alert us, to tell us that we are now moving away from health. So we do need to pay attention to that, not mask it over. And it was Dr. Masha Angel, who was the editor for the New England Journal of Medicine for about 20 years. Imagine the research that went in front of her eyes. And she said, you can never medicate your way out of a situation you've behaved your way into. You'll just feel better as you're getting worse. Right? Pretty wise truth there. So, my job is to, again, move people in that direction. But first, we have to establish some common terminology. And so if we're living in a culture where we're defining health as not sick, and where is that definition coming from? From every commercial on TV that is pushing us in this direction by telling us our healthiest choices are in these processed packaged foods, and in the solution, the notion that the solution can come from a pill for every ill. And it's a whole range from cholesterol all the way now to vaccines being, our systems being inundated with. So let's look at the definitions here and see if we can actually, again, make some sense out of it. I would like to share with you my favorite definition of health. My favorite definition. It's a 3-word definition. And that is optimal cell function. That's what health is. That is it. It's just simply optimal cell function. If that's what health is, then what is sickness? It's a 5-word definition. Anybody guess what that might be? Lack of optimum cell function. That's it. So if we understand health and sickness in this way, it's going to take us far towards understanding what direction do we need to go in. Now, I think of this analogy here similar to the way I think of darkness and light. So you tell me, what is darkness? Is it a thing? Is darkness a thing, something that we can package up and stick in the cupboard if we don't like it? Is it a thing? It's not a thing, is it? No. It's the absence of a thing, isn't it? Right? So if we don't like the darkness that we have, what do we need to do? Add light. Thank you. Right? If we don't like the darkness, we add light. If we don't like the sickness, and that means the chronic illness we're seeing in our kids or in ourselves, if we don't like that, what do we need to do? Add health. That's what we need to do, is add health. So if we look at what happened to me when my father gave me my first chiropractic adjustment, in what way was he adding health so that I had that response? What was going on there? And how is that possible that that could have affected my immune system? Well, first off, we know that there is a vitalistic concept that states that all life contains innate intelligence and that this force is responsible for the organization, maintenance, and healing of the body. So this is how we adapt to our world, is through this life force. Simply stated, there's a difference between a living system and a corpse. Whatever you want to call that, there is a difference between the two. Even if the physical matter is exactly the same, there's something different that is happening there. There's an inborn organizational intelligence, and that intelligence is brilliant. And in fact, that intelligence is within each and every one of you. And when did it start? When does that intelligence start? It starts from the very beginning, right? So now I want to show you one of the youngest, earliest photographs of myself. Looks just like you, right? So we all started from two cells that you can't even see that join together, and 270 days later, we have an entire human being living out in the world, right? A brilliant design. And the first system in the embryo to develop is the nervous system, and it's in charge of controlling and coordinating every system and function after that. It's the master system. And so when we think of this brilliant design, right, we eat food, and then without thinking about it, the amino acids go where they need to go, the fatty acids go where they need to go. When you think about your heart is going to bump 10,000 times today, pumping 2,000 gallons of blood, you don't have to think about a drop of that. You're going to breathe 10,000 times today, we don't have to think about it. It's a brilliant design. And you are designed to be healthy. And all the intelligence that you need to be you is in every single cell. And it started in the two genomes of where you began. And so you are able to express health. It is our default. You're hardwired to express health. And if for some reason you are not expressing health, it's simply because something's getting in the way of that natural design. And so there are two things that can interfere with our ability to express health. And that would be toxins and deficiencies, or both. So when I encounter someone that is struggling with their health, first thing I need to do is assess how are they eating, thinking, and moving. Identify where are the toxins, where are the deficiencies, and then reconcile that. That's it in a nutshell. So do you get that? That's the bigger picture that we are working from. So now let's look closely at, again, how did that chiropractic adjustment affect my immune system? And so what is it that is this brilliant design? What is it all about as we live on this planet? It's about adapting. That's really what it is. So my other favorite definition of health is the ability to adapt to the environment that we're in. And so what system is responsible for allowing us to adapt to our environment? And it's through your nervous system that you perceive the world, adapt to stress, coordinate all the body parts and functions, express your emotions, and create your conscious reality. All that's happening through your nervous system. So let's now look at the other systems in the body that are also communicative systems. So there are three, and that would be the nervous system, the immune system, and the endocrine system. They're all communicative systems, and it is through the interaction of the nervous system and the immune system that we're able to adapt to our world. So let's look closely at that. Let's look at that neuroimmune connection. And so we have two pathways that are the way that the nervous system is connected with the immune system. And the first is through the autonomic nervous system. And so we've heard of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic parts of the nervous system. Parasympathetic is the healing, resting part of the nervous system. That's that foot on the brake when it's time to slow down, rest and heal, rest and digest. And then we have the sympathetic part of the nervous system is when we're active or stressed. So when we look at these two parts of the nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system actually has a direct neural connection with white blood cells, with lymphocytes, with immune system cells. Now we also have the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and that's through the neuroendocrine humoral flow, so through the hormones. And that's the direction, of course, starts up in the brain, goes to the pituitary, and then that cascade of all the different hormonal or endocrine organs, the thyroid, the adrenals, the pancreas, the liver, the reproductive organs. Now, there is a bidirectional communication between the nervous system and the immune system. So those messages are going back and forth, and that is through neuromodulators, through cytokines, through neuromediators, immunomodulators, and I'll tell you what, we've had some speakers that have gone into some fantastic detail with that, and with my agenda today, I'm not going to go deep into that, but just suffice it to say that one of these systems is sending out a chemical messenger, the other one's picking it up, responding, and sending a feedback back. So it's bidirectional, it's coming back and forth. Now, also, it's interesting that the immune system has been considered a large sensory organ. Just like we use our vision and our hearing, the immune system is actually a biosensing organ in a sense. And what that means is that just like when we see something, it may affect our behavior. When we hear something, it may affect our behavior. Although it's not as specific as those senses, when our immune system is messaging our nervous system, it will also affect our behavior. Has anybody here ever experienced malaise? Do you know what that means? Malaise. I love the sound of that word, right? It's when you get the shivers and then you get sleepy and your desire to attack a foe actually goes away, right? You just want to lay down and sleep. So that's actually restorative and protective behavior that's going to allow us to heal when we're sick. And so if we get a fever, right, that's going to lay us down. It's going to affect our actions, our behavior. So the immune system actually in many ways is giving us information that we can pay attention to the same way we get information from our other senses. All right, and so I want to now I want to dive deep into these two, unpack these a bit. So we'll go to the sympathetic nervous system first, and just recognize that, again, the nervous system is going to be sending out information, sending out its messages, and sympathetic nervous system will specifically have the impact of a fast and localized mobilization of white blood cells. So when the sympathetic nervous system is in charge, that's what it's going to do. And once that happens, then those white blood cells, they're going to be out and attacking and killing off the bacteria, the viruses, the parasites. They're going to be producing antibodies. They're going to be attracting more immune cells into the area. They're going to be alerting the nervous system about what's going on in that area. And they're also going to be inhibiting allergic reactions. And so I want to also give another frame of reference that the immune system is not working autonomously. It's not just doing everything it does on its own. And so there's going to be that actually an overseeing by the nervous system of what the immune system's doing. And the nervous system actually will make the decision, is it time to turn on the immune response, or would it be better to actually override that immune response and depress it for right now? So when would it be a good idea to do something like that? Why would we want to actually depress the immune system? How about if a tiger was chasing you? Now, remember, the immune system is a very expensive system to run. And so if a tiger was chasing you and your goal was just to survive the next minute, then you would want to put all of your resources into doing that. And so you would actually turn off and shut down the systems that were going to require resources that wouldn't help you in that moment. So you'd turn down that digestive system, you'd turn down the immune system as well. So there is an intelligence, a brilliant design of why the nervous system may at times depress and override that immune response. So the nervous system is going to be in charge of making that decision of when's a good time to do each thing. And so we want to look at then, again, the connections here. So how is it that the sympathetic nervous system actually connects with this nervous system, the immune system tissue? And we have the lymphatic system, which is such an important part of the immune system. So the spleen, the thymus gland, the lymph nodes are all important. And there's actually direct neuronal connection, nerves going right into it and connecting with lymphocytes in these organs and in this tissue. There's also the bone marrow, which is where our premature red blood cells and white blood cells are. And that has a direct nervous system input as well. And then we, of course, have the immune system in the brain, the glial cells, and we have the skin that has its own immune system component. The gut lining has a very rich lymphoid tissue that is just underneath the surface of the gut lining. And all of that has nervous system fibers going right into it, so there's that immediate neural connection that is there. Now, the other thing that the sympathetic nervous system does is it directs the lymphocyte activity and directs where it's going to go and how big of a response it's going to be. Is it going to keep it local, or is it going to have it go systemic? The sympathetic nervous system is in charge of determining that, and the migration of the lymphocytes, directing the lymphocytes where they're going to go. Now, sometimes there is a depression of the immune system by the nervous system, but other times there may be actually a hyper response that occurs. And sometimes that hyper response may actually go awry. It might go sideways sometimes. And if it does, we have something called allergies, which is an over or inappropriate response to something that should be harmless to us. There's something called substance P, which is something released by the sympathetic nervous system, which is a substance that is approximately 100 to 400 times more potent than a histamine. So it's a big, exaggerated response that occurs. And it may be appropriate at times for that to be useful in the body, but when it goes awry and it goes sideways, it's one of the factors that may be involved with the experience of allergies, that substance P is being triggered inappropriately, that something's interfering with the normal use of that. Also, we know that the vascular tone and the permeability of our blood vessels is regulated by the sympathetic nervous system as well. So whether or not those white blood cells are getting out and the interaction of the red blood cells with the tissue, the exchange of oxygen, all of that can be affected by the sympathetic nervous system. Now, anything that disturbs the nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, actually can have an impact on all of these functions. And when there is a disturbance of the the autonomic nervous system, the message is going from the brain through the spinal cord and then out to the organs, regulating the automatic functions, we call that dysautonomia. Dysautonomia. It's when the brain is not getting the proper messages to regulate our organs through the autonomic nervous system. Sometimes the disturbance can affect not just coming out from the brain, regulating the organs, but the information going to the brain can be distorted information. And that's called disafferentation. And basically what that means is that the brain's perception of itself is either vague or is distorted. And it's referenced as a distorted neural image of self. And that will then result in an altered response, right? So if you have distorted information going in, you may have an inappropriate response coming out. That idea of garbage in, garbage out, right? We've heard that before. And that may be one of the links to why we have autoimmune reactions as well, is that the brain is not perceiving itself in an authentic and accurate way. All right, let's now unpack the neuroendocrine immune connections. And so again, the brain immune system and the hormonal or endocrine system, they actually have a common language that they speak because they use these signal mediators and receptors. So they're using the same language as they send the messaging back and forth. And so in that HPA axis, there's the endocrine organs, the hormones that are sending the messaging out, and it's that cascade that goes all the way down. And there's that interaction between the hormones sending messages to the nervous system sending messages to the endocrine organs. And we know that there is a relationship that when we are stressed, that will impact our mood. And of course, we think of hormones and neurotransmitters. Dr. Candace Pert named them beautifully, the molecules of emotion. So we know that we find that there is a relationship to chronic stress and depression also being associated with allergies and autoimmune concerns. And we also know that the neuroendocrine connections, they also are part of, if there's disturbance there, they can be part of the altered lymphocyte and migration patterns that occur, which we talked about, where the nervous system and the endocrine system are not directing the immune system to migrate to the right place and to have the proper response. So the way we typically, just like we think of in our culture, it's been framed that we would think of health as not sick. The way we think of our immune system is as though it is autonomous, kind of like the idea of a virus shows up in your blood and then the white blood cells go after it. That's the way we tend to think of the immune system, that it's just operating on its own. And that anytime there's a virus in the blood, once we recognize it, then we're going to get that disease and then we're going to fight it off. But there's some really amazing research, science that we can look at that tells us there's way more to it than that. And that is this, the curious example of Masha and Dasha. Has anybody heard of Masha and Dasha? Masha and Dasha were Siamese twins, and they were joined at the hip. And what was interesting about this, I first heard this story from Dr. Ted Koren, and he explained that the twins, they shared a circulatory system, which meant that anything that showed up in the blood of one of them was going to show up in the blood of the other one, of the twin. And what was interesting was that as they were interconnected and they shared each other's blood, the thing that was surprising is that illness affected them differently. Now that's really interesting. So let's see, Masha, I think Masha was the one that was a little bit more bent over to the side. And Masha she was short-sighted, and she would have colds a lot more frequently. What else about her? I can't remember what else. Those were the key things that I remember. Now, Dasha, she was a little bit more upright, and she had a much stronger, healthier constitution. She even smoked occasionally. And she had good eyesight, right? So here are these two sisters. Can you imagine this, right? And they're sharing a circulatory system, an excretory system, a lymphatic system, right? They're sharing all of these systems. The blood is flowing back and forth. And when something like the measles happens, one of them gets the measles and the other one doesn't. But the measles virus was showing up in the blood of both of these twins. And this happened repeatedly, whether it was the flu or colds or the other childhood illnesses, they would experience them at different times. Isn't that wild? Like, doesn't that blow your mind? Because, wait a minute, I thought it was all about the presence of the virus, right? So what was it that made them different? What was it that made them different? They had their own separate central nervous systems, their own separate spines. They were joined at the hip. They had their own nervous systems, right? So that's what's really fascinating about a scenario like that. That it's really not about the presence of the germ, and it really is about the susceptibility of the individual. And we know that actually the nervous system is part of that setup of whether you have more susceptibility. So let's explore that idea now. Now let's look at this idea of the spinal cord, the central nervous system. It's one of the most important systems in the body. How do we know that? It's the only one that's fully encased in bone, right? So we've got our brain with this vault around it, the skull, and then there's a hole in the bottom of the skull where the brainstem comes through, and then that brainstem extends all the way down the spine in the spinal cord. That spinal cord, it's a direct extension off the brain. I wish they had called it the brainal cord, because then people would get that your spinal cord is the part of your brain that lives in your back, right? Maybe they take care of their spine more if they thought of it that way, right? We're all wearing the helmets to protect the brain inside, and we bang our head. Let's check it out, make sure there's no concussion, right? But if you bang your spine, oh, you know, rest up, take a couple of Advil, right? It'll go away, right? Isn't that what happens? So our nervous system actually has a suit of armor around it to protect it. And the spine is designed to last a lifetime. And when we think of the spine, we want to remember straight is strong. But when we look at it from the side, we want to have some nice curves in that spine, because that's the spring in the spine. And as long as we have a healthy, aligned spine, it'll last us a lifetime. It's when we have disturbances, when we have traumas, and coupled with poor posture and bad habits, habituated day after day, otherwise called life, right? That's what tends to start to cause disturbance in the spinal alignment, which then starts to affect our nervous system. So when, you know, I've told you that I've studied health and healing for 40 years, and if I were to look at what's the most important piece that I learned in that time that I can share with other people, especially the part that I think is most often missed, it would be this: that if you want to be healthy, you have to have a healthy nervous system. And if you want a healthy nervous system, you have to have a healthy spine. Our spine is our lifeline. Our spine is our lifeline. And it's that connection. If the brain is getting the messages through the spinal cord, out through the nerve roots to every cell and back again without interference, you get to be healthy. But if there's something that is disturbing that flow of messages, that's when we start to see breaking down in function in the body. And that is a term called subluxation. Vertebral subluxations is when there's a misalignment of the vertebrae that's interfering with the nervous system function. And so remember, we had those long words that I mentioned earlier, the dysautonomia and the disafferentation. There's another one I want to introduce to you, which is dyskinesia. Basically means bad movement. So when we have a subluxation, when we have a misalignment of the vertebrae that's putting pressure on the nerves, if we have a jolt or a jar that starts that process, or we have ongoing repetitive bad posture and bad habits that promote that, when that misaligns, that's going to start to damage tissue, and it's going to irritate the nervous system. And so the body's going to want to actually strap down that joint and stop it from moving, because all that movement, when it's misaligned, creates more and more irritation to the nervous system. So it's going to strap it down and it's going to immobilize it, stop it from moving. Now, that's not normal in that joint to have it not moving. And that literally starts to send stress signaling up to the brain saying, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. And the brain then starts to go into a inflammatory response in the body that is associated with stress hormones racing around the body, cortisol. So cortisol levels go up when we have these subluxations that are fixated and not moving through their normal range of motion, otherwise known as dyskinesia. And so that's one aspect of the subluxation. Then there's dysautonomia, which I mentioned already, which can literally alter organ and tissue responses to hormones, infectious agents, and blood components. And remember, the other aspect of dysautonomia, not just a depression of the immune system, but an hyperactivity in the immune system would be the allergies. And we also know that the dysautonomia could change the lymphocyte migration patterns and the vascular tone and permeability as well. And then, of course, there's the disafferentation, which is diminishing the ability of the individual to sense and repair damage, to combat infection, combat cancer, and so on. So that's that garbage in, garbage out, not really having that clear neural image of the self. And so that distorted neural image of the self and the relationship of self to the environment, that's one of the problems with disafferentation. I want to now show you I want to dive deep into this and show you a map of the nervous system. And people love this in my practice when I give them the map of the nervous system and I show them, where do these nerves go to? So we've got the central nervous system here, we've got the peripheral nervous system here, and we've got the organ systems here. And some of the earliest research in chiropractic in 1921 was a study called the Windsor autopsies. And Dr. Windsor was a medical doctor that heard that chiropractic was having these results of helping women with reproductive problems and people with respiratory problems and with kidney problems and with heart problems. And he wanted to know, how is this possible? They're doing the same thing, but they're affecting all these different concerns, these maladies. And so what he did is he went and did autopsies on cadavers, both human and cat cadavers. And what he did is he dissected them and he found every disease that was going on in that body. Not just the cause of death, but everything, even the things they didn't know was going on. He found all the diseased tissue. And then he would trace that tissue back to the spine and see, was there any kind of subluxation there? And in 96% correlation, there was. And he looked at heart diseases and kidney diseases and liver diseases and bowel diseases, even to the specificity of finding a wart on someone's finger, which would be a virus, right? That's immune system. And he traced it back, and that was exactly where one of their subluxations was. That was in 1921. We've had this research for all of that time. And so when we think of this, this disturbance in the pathways, it's a lot like that idea of a fuse box, right? So you tell me this. If all the electricity goes off in one room in your house suddenly, do you go and check all the individual light bulbs and the toaster and the refrigerator to try to figure out what's wrong here? Is that what we do? No. We go right down to the basement and check the fuse box, don't we? Because we know if that whole section is being affected, we're going to go to the fuse box. So chiropractors work with the fuse box, which is the spine. And the spine is the place where nerve interference can occur that can affect all of the organ functions. I want to now take you on a little historical journey here. And we're going to go back 100 years, just about 100 years to today, and look at the heroes of the 1918 Spanish Flu Epidemic. And they were the vitalists. So this is pretty fascinating that at the time, they in Davenport, Iowa, which is where the first school of chiropractic was, they found that during this Spanish, and this was a big deal, this epidemic, there were there were, 2 million people, 20 million people worldwide died in this flu epidemic. And 500,000 Americans died in this. And so the medical doctors, in this particular tallying that they did in Davenport, they had 93,590 cases that they were attending to, and of those, they had a little over 6,000 deaths. So that means that they had 1 death in every 15 patients. The chiropractors in the area took care of 4,735 cases. They had 6 deaths, and so that's losing 1 patient in 866 cases. So chiropractic, in the very earliest days, it was all about helping people with health concerns and immune system concerns. It wasn't about back pain and neck pain. It was about helping people with their health, restoring their health. In 1925, there was a book that was called Chiropractic Statistics, and they had over 100,000 cases that they were looking at with 110 different conditions. And I pulled out a few of the ones that would relate to the immune system. And so they looked at what was the percentage of recovery when they were working with these cases. They had things like, here we go, gonorrhea, 83% resolution, that they helped those cases. They had influenza, 99% recovered. Measles, 98% recovered. Scarlet fever, 98% recovered. Smallpox, 99% recovered through chiropractic care. And then, I'm not sure if any of you heard Dr. Suzanne Humphrey's talk on polio. So here's one more interesting tidbit. Winifred Gardella was the poster child for the March of Dimes in 1952-53, right here in San Francisco. She was the poster child for San Francisco. And you know, the whole idea of the March of Dimes was to raise money for research to help folks that were plagued with polio. And so the doctors, the story about her is that the doctors worked for 2.5 years trying to help heal her. And they just got to the point where there was no hope. But her grandparents wouldn't give up. And so her grandparents actually searched out, and they found a chiropractor, Dr. Lewis Robertson, who started adjusting her and working with her. And 6 months later, she threw away the crutches and the braces. And this is actually a well-known picture of her defiantly walking with her chiropractor down the street. And, you know, all that money raised for the March of Dimes that was paying for the 2.5 years of care that they got no results, none of that money went to that chiropractor. I want to now fast forward to one of the other research cases I just love, which is how chiropractic impacts our ability to deal with ecogenetic toxins. And this was Dr. Ronald Perrow's research in Lund, Sweden. And it looked at measuring the enzymes that were related to how well we can repair cell damage and also how well we could repair genetic mutations. And if people had this enzyme, then they were going to be, it was easier for them to adapt to hazardous environmental exposures and oxidative stress. So what they did is they had 3 groups of people. They had a group that was under chiropractic care for at least 6 months. They had a group that was considered healthy normal, no symptoms, no sickness, no known illnesses. And then they had seriously ill people. And they measured the enzyme levels in all of these folks. And what they found was that the healthy normal folks had 2 times the level of these enzymes, these protective enzymes, compared to the seriously ill folks. But what was surprising was that the chiropractic group had 4 times the seriously ill. So they had double the healthy normal and then 4 times the seriously ill folks. Wow. And what was especially interesting is he really looked closely at was there anything that was different between these 2 groups. And the only difference was that one had had long-term chiropractic care, 6 months. That's not even that long-term. 6 months of regular chiropractic care, and they had these kinds of outcomes. And also, it's kind of well known that immune competency is decreased over age. as you age. And what he found in this group was that they had age range of 21 to 84 years old, and there was no decrease in immune competency no matter how old the person got. So there was something that was happening at the genetic level in the expression of the potential to have a strong immune response in the group that was under chiropractic care. He also did a follow-up study to look at this again in a more of a I think it was more of a longitudinal study, and my dad was actually part of that study as somebody that had been under long-term chiropractic care. So there's been lots of research that actually has shown the relationship of chiropractic care and how it impacts all these different aspects of immune system response. And I want to just highlight a couple of these cases. So there was one, Dr. Solano, who he did work looking at the CD4 counts in the AIDS patients, the HIV positive patients, and he found, and they had chiropractic care for 6 months in one group, and then the other group was a placebo. And in the placebo group, there was a decrease of 7.96% in their CD4 cell counts. Like, you don't want any decrease, and it was just creeping down. But in the chiropractic group, there was a 48% increase in the CD4 counts. There was another study looking at serum thiol, and serum thiol, again, is a marker for how well you're able to repair your DNA. And in this particular study, the enzymes that they looked at, what they found is that the average person would have 90 nanomoles of cysteine. Don't worry about what cysteine is, but just remember the 90. And that at this level, you would have a 95% risk of getting 9 different chronic illnesses, the major chronic illnesses. And what they found was that the group that had 1 year of chiropractic care, their level of cysteine went right up to 124. And at the level of that, once it reaches 120 nanomoles, the risk of those chronic diseases plummets to 5%. And then they had another, they followed it along, and if you had 3 years of chiropractic care, the cysteine levels were at 146 nanomoles, right? So that's your ability to repair your DNA simply by being under chiropractic care. And now I want to show you a study that is fascinating, showing that idea of that distorted neural image. Like, what does that mean to not have an accurate perception of your body in the signaling going to your brain? So this was a functional MRI study, and it looked at, this is before somebody was adjusted by a chiropractor, and this is after. Now, you can see that this brain is all lit up, and so it's looking at the blood flow in the brain. And when you're using an area of the brain, that's when you're going to have more blood flow there. So these two brains, you can see they're lit up. And what the person was asked to do in this functional MRI was to simply move their foot in a purposeful way, like a dance step, something they had to kind of think about. And so in order to perform that simple movement, their whole brain had to go to work to get that done. And they were subluxated, meaning they were not getting that accurate, clear flow of information between the brain and the body. So this is kind of like if you were to use all of your senses to throw a ball up in the air and then catch it, it's pretty easy to do that. But let's say I have you do that with your eyes closed. Now you throw that ball up and you're going to try to use everything you have to get it. You have to get more input going there. So when they adjusted the person and then they put them back into the functional MRI and had them do the exact same thing again, you can see that there's just this small part of the brain that's lit up. And that part of the brain is the motor cortex for the foot. That's the part that should be lit up running that function. There was a 2,000% greater efficiency in brain function between before and after the adjustment. What would you do if you had 2,000% greater efficiency of your brain right now? Like, what else would your body be able to do with that, right? So when we have a distorted neural image, it takes up our whole brain to just get things done on the simplest level. But when we have that clear nervous system, then we can actually just be very efficient with how we're running our body and how our brain is being used. Now, how would you know if you actually had a subluxation? How would you know if your nervous system was even affecting your immune system? Well, one of the indicators that we use to determine if someone is subluxated is posture. That if you have distortions in your posture, that's a really good sign that you may have nerve interference, right? So the two things that posture analysis tells us is how well is the brain tracking where the body is in space. If I give an instruction to have somebody stand with equal weight on both feet looking straight ahead, and they're doing this, that tells me their brain is not getting accurate information. There's some distortion there in proprioception, and so that means there may be subluxation. Or maybe they have a subluxation that's irritating the nerve, and their smart body is wanting to lean away and get away from that irritation. Whether there's pain or not, their smart body may want to lean away from it. We also know that there's that stress physiology that can show up in the nervous system. When we're in a hunched posture, that's a sign of defensive survival posturing. And that's going to be a sign that there's stress in the nervous system as well, especially if there's no stress happening at the moment and we're defaulting to that. That's something that I specialize with folks in my clinic, is helping them deal with stress more effectively. So posture is one thing. Then we also have technology to do scans of the nervous system. So if I want to measure that dysautonomia, if I want to measure nerve interference in the autonomic nervous system, I have a scan I can actually run to show me that. And so this person right here, if we think of that map of the nervous system that I mentioned, right? This is the nerve supply to the spleen, to the digestive system, the gut, the adrenal glands. This is the colon. So I can already have an idea of how their health might be being affected by what I find from my scans. And then we have other ways. If we're going to measure, this would be measuring the dysautonomia. If we're going to measure dyskinesia, we're going to look at restrictions and ranges of motion, palpating and motioning the joint, looking at some x-rays to see that altered alignment. So lots of ways that we're going to be measuring the presence of subluxations, and then also whether or not we're correcting them. Because over time, we're going to rescan and see the evolution and the improvements that happen. So how do we correct subluxations? It's a three-legged stool model. So healing happens in a rhythm, and our best results are going to come when we're adjusting people in a rhythm. And then there's exercises to strengthen their spine and to work with their posture. And then there's breaking the bad habits, because it's the bad habits that they're habituated in that keep recreating these subluxation patterns. So I need to train them on how to not keep recreating subluxations all day long. And that's how we get the results that we get. So you need all three legs of that stool, and if you're trying to sit on a two-legged stool, it's hard to do that successfully. If you want to heal successfully, it's that three-legged stool that's so important. Now let's look at those bad habits. What does that actually mean? Well, if we're going to look at breaking the bad habits, stopping the recreation of the patterns, we're looking at what actually is it that causes subluxations. And it's overload. It's stress overload, but in three dimensions. It's going to be your psychological, emotional stresses, biochemical stresses, and your physical stresses. And really what that comes down to, it's how you eat, how you think, and how you move. That's what it comes down to. So these modern day stresses are overloading burdens to us, and they are what are creating and perpetuating the subluxations, and they are cumulative. And this idea of cumulative, this allostatic load, this buildup of stresses over time, those emotional, chemical, and physical stresses, they all have to be managed by our internal capacity. But it's the nervous system that is the interface between the outside stresses and our internal capacity. So if we have a clear nervous system, then we have an accurate perception and an accurate response. It gives us our best chance of dealing with these stresses. But if we have a distorted, subluxated nervous system, then that's going to have us not perceiving the stresses accurately and not responding. So it drops our ability to deal with them at a significant level. Now, one of these stresses in the past 10, 15, 20 years has become the most dominant stress, more so than ever before, and that is the chemical stresses. Chemical stresses have become so bad that they're actually affecting the cells themselves. And so if I'm trying to adjust somebody's nervous system and clear it, but the cells themselves are so toxic that they can't perform, then my results are not as good. And so even though I get good results, if I'm not getting great results, I want to know why. And so in the last few years, I've had to actually look upstream and look at what do we need to do to actually relieve this toxic burden, and even at the cellular level. So I want to show you just quickly, what do I mean by that? So here we have a cell. We've got the DNA, the brain of the cell, the ATP, the energy, and in order for a cell to do a function, the DNA is going to trigger it to do that. But before the DNA makes any changes, it has to be triggered by the things around the communication chemicals and hormones. So vitamin D is going to come in. It's going to interface with the cell membrane, which then sends a trigger to tell the DNA to do something different. Or maybe it's a thyroid hormone, or maybe testosterone or progesterone or insulin or cortisol and so on. And they all need to come up to that membrane and fill in the receptor, and that will then trigger the response of the DNA. Now also, we have to have the toxins that are built up in the cell, they have to be able to get out, and nutrients have to be able to get in. All that's happening through the membrane. In our toxic burdened world, we have inflammation of the membrane of the cell. And when that happens, it takes more and more of these hormones to be present before any of them can get through. You know what that's called? That's called hormone resistance. All right? So think of hypothyroid, think of insulin resistance, think of weight loss resistance, right? It's because the information's not getting in. And not only that, the toxins are not getting out. And so if we're really going to make a dent on this chemical stress, this is the one that has been so difficult for me in my practice with those tough cases, is we have to address this at a cell level. And so what we do then is we need to fix the cell. And so the program that I've been using in, most recently that has been most effective, and I'm talking severe neurological, severe chronic illness. I'm talking about working with autistic children and patients with ALS and with MS and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and cases that are just resistant, even ADHD kids, that whole range. And this is what we found, is that this program is called True Cellular Detox, and it literally is the roadmap that teaches people how to heal up the cell itself, and then how to open and support the detox pathways, and how to use true binders to actually remove the toxins, including heavy metals, from the inside of the cell all the way through the gut, all the way out of the body. And sometimes there are detoxes that people use looking at herbal cleanses or liver cleanses or colon cleanses, and those are downstream. So yes, those are important. Yes, they can make a difference, but not to the level that we need in order to really fix the cell. We have to go upstream from there. And it takes time to do that as well. So there are 3 phases in this system. The first phase is the prep phase, and that's just to strengthen the downstream pathways, the detox pathways, and prepare that cell. Start to heal up that cell so that things can start to move in and out in a healthier way. Then the body phase, the goal is to actually set up a concentration gradient. So we're going to start to pull the toxins out from around the cells, and as soon as you take that burden away, now the stuff that's in the cell can start to make its way out of the cell. And then the last phase is the brain phase, and the goal here is to remove the metals and the deeper toxins and the deeper tissues, and that's actually where the real problem is. And when we can get to that level, that's when the biggest changes occur. And I've had folks that are actually, I have folks with ALS that are regaining function. I have folks with MS that are, again, regaining a level of health and wellness that they haven't experienced in years. So it's very exciting to see what's possible when we combine detoxing the body along with getting the nervous system as clear as possible. And in my office, just anybody that is interested in that, I do work with folks with the True Cellular Detox program that are not patients in my practice. So if any of you are interested in that, in my office, and it's a whole program. So it includes 90 days of supplements, but it also is a training program on how to do this true cellular detox. It includes it's an online program, and it includes 90 day meal plans and smoothie recipes, but it also has a discussion forum. It has 8 hours of educational videos. It has 24 articles that are going to teach you advanced strategies all about intermittent fasting and ketosis. So it's a very robust system. And I used to do all those individual pieces with people. It was hard. It was hard to have them be compliant with it. And this program makes it so easy. So the usual cost of it is $29.97. In my practice, I discount it for folks and drop it to $19.97. And I wanted to have a special for all of you here. So for the LiveAware special, I've dropped it to $14.97. So if anybody wants to take advantage of that, I'm happy to work with you on that. And also, I wanted to make one other offer for you, which is if you go to my website, wellspringcls.com/TCD. If you go there, what I've arranged is there's a neurotoxic questionnaire that you can take. It's one of the pieces that I use as I measure when people start the program, what's their level of toxicity, and then as they go through the program, we remeasure that every month, and you can literally see how their system's getting healthier and healthier. So if you want to just take that neurotoxic questionnaire, you can just do that for free on my website. That's my gift to you. And if you're curious, once you take that questionnaire, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions for you on that. Also, if you want just more information right away about the program, if you send a text to 44222, and in the message part you put in Think Clear, it actually will give you a 10-minute video that will give you a little bit more broader explanation of the program. And if you want a lot more information, if you're that kind of person, if you, instead of Think Clear, if you type in Finish, it's actually going to give you, I think it's about an hour-long explanation of the program. And the reason it says Finish is I run it in my office, and people are coming in waiting to get adjusted, and they see one part of it, and they're like, but I want to watch the rest of it. And I say, okay, now just text and type in Finish, you can see the whole thing. So you're welcome to use that as well. Now, detox, it's an important part. It's not the only part. And it's really the synergy of the lifestyle changes that we make that really is the most profound effect on health. And when I make recommendations to people, I'm explaining to them, this is how you exercise, and this is how you manage stress, and we have technologies and strategies that we use for that. And what I found was when I would get to the part about their diet, and I'd say things like, don't eat GMO foods, and they'd be like, what's that? And then I'd explain that it's hidden, and it's not on the label, but don't eat them. And they're like, what do I do now? And so this was actually the hardest part of my recommendations for them to follow, was to make changes in the diet. And then I'd say, you know, and you want to eat organic, and they'd say, well, that food's really expensive. And it's true, it is expensive. And so a few years ago, I actually started an online grocery store with all non-GMO foods, so they don't have to read any labels. It's the lowest prices on the internet, and it has an option of free shipping to your door. No membership fees, and it's Wellspring Market. And I wanted to share it with you because, again, it's another resource for you. So I always tell people, you want to buy local, you want to know your farmer, get the freshest things you can. But for those convenient foods or the things that you're going to buy in the grocery store anyway, if you're not sure, just go to Wellspring Market. Now, we're restructuring the whole store, and in about a month or so, we're going to reopen with about 2,000 different products. And when we do that, if you are signed up, we'll send you a notice, and you'll get 30% off your first order. So if anybody wants to take advantage of that, again, if you there's a brochure in your goodie bag there, your tote bag, or you can just go to Wellspring Market, wellspringcls.com/Wellspring Market. It's right on my website, and that'll take you there too. So I want to just finish up just with your action steps. Last thing. And so your action steps, again, if you take all this information in and do nothing about it, it doesn't help you, does it? So your action steps are, first, if you're not under chiropractic care, go get checked by a chiropractor. Get your nervous system checked to see if you have any subluxations that might be interfering with your health. And I'm from Vermont. Anybody here from Vermont? I'm happy to work with you if you are, but I think you're not. And so we actually have chiropractors that are attending the conference here. Dr. Christine Hicks is right in San Francisco. Some of you may have met Dr. Eileen Karpfinger, who's over at the CBD oil table. She's also a chiropractor. And so you are in good hands, because I've chatted with these two folks, and when chiropractors talk, they always say, well, what technique do you use? So I know they're really good. Yeah, so you have great resources here. So that's your first thing, is really get your nervous system checked. The second thing is consider true cellular detox to really be that profound level of detox that your body may really need. And thirdly, check out Wellspring Market. And I want to just thank you for your time and attention today. I envision a world where the natural state is extraordinary health, and I hope you'll join me. Thank you.